بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا إلى يوم الدين أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد إن إبراهيم كان أمة قانتا لله حنيفا صدق الله العظيم. Today we're going to be looking at the life of Ibrahim alayhi salam. In the short time that we have, it's not enough to look at his entire life. Well, definitely not in a way that we can try to draw some lessons from it. So rather than just read through the several selections of verses that discuss the life of Ibrahim alayhi salam, we're going to try to we'll try to provide an overview, but rather than that, I'm going to try to cover aspects that are generally not covered, because every year during the Eid, the sacrifice, Eid al-Adha, you'll generally hear the story about Ismail alayhi salam and how Ibrahim alayhi salam sees the dream to sacrifice his son, and he tries to obey that order. So I'm not going to speak about that in detail because that's generally covered. I want to start right from the beginning and speak about the other challenges that he faced before that challenge with his son. First and foremost, Ibrahim alayhi salam is a prophet after a series of prophets. Adam alayhi salam and so on and so forth afterwards. He seems to be a fifth or sixth or seventh grandson after Nuh alayhi salam. So Nuh alayhi salam is considered to be the second father of the nations, and the reason for that is Nuh alayhi salam, during his time, as you know, there was the floods, and it's only the believers with him that had survived, and thereafter the progeny began again. And Nuh alayhi salam had 3 sons, and whenever you look at any ancestry or genealogy, it'll always end up at Nuh alayhi salam through one of his sons, Sam, Ham and Yafith. So these are the 3 sons of Nuh alayhi salam that pretty much all the progenies, all his descendants come through. So likewise, if you look at Ibrahim alayhi salam's ancestry, his genealogy, it's Ibrahim ibn Tarikh. Tarikh or Tarih, just depends on how you say it. Tarikh is his father's name. There's a difference of opinion whether his name was Azar or Tarikh, because Azar is the name mentioned in the Quran. However, most of the genealogies mention it as Tarikh. Some hadith mention it as Tarikh as well. It says that one of them was probably his title or his nickname, and the other one was actually his given name. So it's Ibrahim ibn Azar or Tarikh, ibn Nahur, ibn Sarukh, ibn Rahu, ibn Faligh, ibn Abir, ibn Shalih, ibn Arfakhshad, ibn Sam, ibn Nuh alayhi salam. So as you can see, we've got just several names between him and Nuh alayhi salam. So you can see it's very close to that period. Then what you have is his mother's name there's again difference of opinion as to what her name was, whether it was Amila or Umayla or Buna, or again, she was also from that same genealogy. She was from that the same descendants of Arfakhshad ibn Sam ibn Nuh. Ibrahim alayhi salam was generally referred to as Abu Dayfan because he loved to have guests. He would hardly eat alone. He loved to have guests. He was a very hospitable individual. And other than that, his father, Tarikh or Azar, had him when he was 75 years old. That's when Ibrahim alayhi salam was born. And likewise, it seems like the tradition continues because Ibrahim alayhi salam had his first son most likely when he was 80 something years old. What's interesting though is that Ibrahim alayhi salam's father had Ibrahim, and he had another son whose name was Tahur and Haran. So Ibrahim alayhi salam had 2 brothers, and Ibrahim alayhi salam seemed to be the middle brother. He was the middle brother. And Haran, so you had Tahur and Haran, his other 2 brothers. Haran is the one whose son was Lut alayhi salam, the famous nephew of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And Ibrahim alayhi salam came from Babylon, from Babil. In Arabic it's called Babil, it's Babylon, in current day Iraq, in that area. That's where he came from. It says that at a young age he left with his father. His father himself, he was married to Sarah alayhi salam, who is, they say, of his family. There's difference of opinion as to exactly who she is, but it says that she was one of the family members, one of his cousins maybe, or somebody else in the general family. He got married to her, so his father left with him. His father left with him and his nephew and his wife, and they went to a place called Harran, which was closer to Jerusalem, because that's eventually where they ended up. So he got to Harran. Now that's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, initially he has a discussion with his father. He has a number of different dialogues. You're probably aware of some of them. He has a dialogue with his father that you shouldn't worship idols. Then he has a dialogue where he seems to be self-reflecting over who is God, what is God, who is the creator, and thus he looks at the moon and the sun and the stars, and then he comes to a conclusion. And then after that he has another dialogue with the idols themselves and the people who were worshipping the idols, which was his tribe, the people who his father hailed from. So we're going to quickly look at those, inshallah. That will give us an idea, because there's a number of lessons in that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذ قال إبراهيم لأبيه آزر أتتخذ أصناما آلهة إني أراك وقومك في ضلال مبين وكذلك نري إبراهيم ملكوت السماوات والأرض وليكون من الموقنين فلما جن عليه الليل رأى كوكبا قال هذا ربي فلما أفل قال لا أحب الآفلين. So it looks like he is searching. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, remember when Abraham said to his father Azar, how can you take idols as gods? Later on he'll describe why he doesn't like idols as gods, because he doesn't see that they move. He sees them as extremely passive objects that are there, that people have to come and serve, and people come and present food in front, the food rots, then they have to take it away. He doesn't see how a god can be an immovable object, something that's very passive and so on. So then what he does is, he seems to look elsewhere. So you can see that there's a kind of a transition. So he looks away from the idols, he's looking up into the heavens. He tells his father, he says, how can you take idols as God? I see that you and your people have clearly gone astray. It doesn't seem that at this time he's angry enough to go and break the idols. That happens later. Though I'm not sure if it's out of anger or it's actually it's a strategy, right? So that we're going to look at that later. In this way, we showed Abraham God's mighty dominion over the heavens and the earth, so that he may be a firm believer. That's what Allah says in the Quran. When the night grew dark over him, he sees a star. Now, stars are always around. This wasn't the first time that a star appeared and he had this interaction with it, right? But when you start looking, then you start noticing things. When you start searching, then everything around you seems to be providing an answer or an attraction. Right? So for example, if you're looking to buy a particular type of car or handbag or something, you'll eventually start seeing them everywhere. Whereas until now, you've ignored them. You may have seen dozens of them, but you never paid attention. So likewise, at night time, when the night grew dark over him, he saw a star and he said, this is my Lord, because it's shining, it's elevated, it's high, it seems to be above and transcendent beyond everything else. It doesn't seem to be passive. It seems to have some aura and some illumination about it. So he said, this must be my Lord. Now there's difference of opinion whether this was a personal reflection, or whether this was something that he was actually dialoguing with somebody else, saying, look, this is your Lord, and trying to actually take them on a journey to say, this is not your Lord, because he first says, this is my Lord. But when it set, when the star set, when they were overcome by the other lights, he said, I do not like things that set. He is looking, he's a very intelligent man. He is actually looking for something, and he seems to think he knows what he's looking for. Then he saw the moon rising. The moon is clearly much larger than any of the stars in our sight. Although the stars may be very, very, very large in their reality, but because of them being so far, they seem to be just small twinkling specks in the sky. And the moon, it seems to be much larger. So he says, when he saw the moon rising, he said, "This is my Lord." As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, فَلَمَّا رَأَى الْقَمَرَ بَازِغًا قَالَ هَذَا رَبِّي فَلَمَّا أَفَلَ قَالَ لَئِن لَّمْ يَهْدِنِي رَبِّي لَأَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الضَّالِّينَ. However, when the moon also sets, he said, now he seems to be asking for help. He seems to be asking for help. Because until now, he doesn't call on to anything else. He doesn't invoke anybody. But now that when the moon sets as well, he suddenly says, if my Lord does not guide me, I shall be one of those who go astray. I'm going wrong too many times. I consider the stars my Lord, they set. I consider the moon my Lord, that set as well. Now I need to ask. It seems you can't ask. You can't ask for something if you don't believe in it. So clearly there was that belief in there. And this is not far-fetched. The reason for it is that we as Muslims, most people have probably heard this hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and people misquote it and say every child that's born is born a Muslim. That is not what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. He did not say that kullu mawludin yuladu ala al-Islam. He didn't say that. He said ala al-fitra. Every child is born on the fitra, the primordial nature. I like to translate this generally as natural faith. What I mean by natural faith is that I'm going back to when as Allah says in the Quran, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ قَالُوا بَلَى شَهِدْنَا عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِنَا. Which is that when Allah created Adam alayhi salam, He extracted all of his progeny that was to come about until Day of Judgment. So every single one of us and everybody that will come and that has already come. And He manifested Himself in front of them, and then He asked them, aren't I your Lord? Now they had no reason to say no, because they just come from that divine realm. And this was their inception, this was their beginning. There was no corruption, pollution, distraction or adulteration. So then He said, Bala, of course you're our Lord. So now when people come into the world, they come having had that experience, though they can't remember that experience in the world. However, there is that inclination only towards that side. That's what you call natural faith. Because then the Prophet ﷺ said, then the parents, they either turn their children into Christians or Jews or Magians, or today secularists or capitalists or communists or whatever you have, right? He had that natural faith, so he seems to be calling out and saying, if God does not, he's saying, if my Lord does not guide me, so he's already accepted a Lord somehow. And that's natural. I remember once we were having an open house. In our masjid. And at the end of the talk, this individual comes by and he said, I need your help. I want you to help me understand who God is. Because I want to understand Him, but I can't. My background is atheist. So what happens in anybody's life, what happens with any of us is that whenever we see any experience outside, whenever we experience anything in our lives, we will generally translate that, interpret it, understand it through what we already know, whatever our mindset is, however we've been taught to understand things. So if a person has always been a denier of God, then they're constantly going to be trying to interpret things away from God. However, it seemed like this man was having a rebellion inside, as though the truth was trying to speak. And he really wanted help, he said. And likewise, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, that when people who deny God, when they get into the middle of the ocean, and that is a really an amazing kind of depiction, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts it, because if you're on land, we're used to being on land, and we don't feel as helpless on land as we do in the ocean, because on land we generally know that you can duck or jump down or go here or go there. We relate more to the land than we do to the sea. And if you're in the middle of an ocean and then the waves start rolling up, then that is a much more precarious and a vulnerable situation. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says people generally call out to the Lord in that kind of situation. So he says, then this is my Lord and this is great. So I shall be, if my Lord does not guide me, I shall be one of those who go astray. Then the next thing he sees is فَلَمَّا رَأَى الشَّمْسَ بَازِغَةً. He suddenly then sees the bright sun come about. As I mentioned to you earlier, this was not the first time that he was seeing the sun, but this was the first time he was seeing it with those eyes, right? With those eyes of reflection, looking for something. He's a man on a mission who's looking for something. فَلَمَّا رَأَى الشَّمْسَ بَازِغَةً قَالَ هَذَا رَبِّي هَذَا أَكْبَرُ فَلَمَّا أَفَلَتْ قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ إِنِّي بَرِيءٌ مِّمَّا تُشْرِكُونَ. Finally, he says that when he saw the sun rising, he then cried, "This is my Lord, this is greatest, this is the greater, or this is the greatest, this is the biggest thing I've seen so far. It seems to dominate everything else, it brings light everywhere." But then when the sun set as well, he said, "My people, I disown all that you worship besides God." Now from this you can tell that there was some, he doesn't seem to be speaking to himself. He seems to be speaking to others. He's reporting back to others. He's mentioning his ideas to others. He says, now I can understand that God is beyond everything. He is not seeable. He is not someone you can observe. He is out of this universe. So he seems to have come to some understanding there. And then he says, and he seems to have gained gnosis and recognition of God. And that is what Allah promises to anybody who is sincerely searching for God. Allah will always help them. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he carries on, he says, إِنِّي وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِيَ لِلَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ حَنِيفًا وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. So then he says, I have turned my face as a true believer towards Him who created the heavens and the earth. I am not one of the polytheists. He suddenly recognizes that I cannot see my God because God created everything that I can see. So God is beyond that. He comes to that realization. And when he comes to that realization, he declares it very clearly. And then he says, how can you argue with me about God when He has guided me? وَحَاجَّهُ قَوْمُهُ. His people started to argue with him, debate with him. Now remember, for a debate, you don't need to be on the truth. You just need to be able to speak. You just need to put some arguments forward. And there's a whole science of rhetoric and logic that goes behind how to speak correctly, how to build your arguments, right? That proves in itself that not all arguments are sound. Arguments are based on premises. Arguments are based on premises. The premises have to be true for that argument to be sound. So anybody can come with any argument. That's why if anybody studied logic or rhetoric, you'll understand that it's a straw man argument where you just build up something that is totally fallible, and you try to convince people to think that this is what it's all about. So likewise, it doesn't take too much to argue. So his people argue with him. But he said, how can you argue with me about God when He has guided you? I do not fear anything you associate with Him unless my Lord wills. Nothing can happen. My Lord encompasses everything in His knowledge. How can you take heed? Now it carries on. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't speak about Ibrahim alayhi salam all in one place. He speaks about him in different places. And the whole purpose of the Quran is that it's not a book of stories. It's not although we have a chapter of Ibrahim and we have a chapter of Nuh and we have a chapter of of Mary and so on. It's not, all their stories are not restricted to those chapters. The reason is that the Quran is a book of knowledge. The Quran is a book of lessons. The Quran is a book of reflection. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to scatter these stories, the relevant parts of these stories, wherever He wants, so that as we're reading, we will think about something. And then after that, Allah will speak about it again and we'll reflect on it again. So now in the second part here it says, وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ إِنَّهُ كَانَ صِدِّيقًا نَبِيًّا إِذْ قَالَ لِأَبِيهِ يَا أَبَتِ لِمَ تَعْبُدُ مَا لَا يَسْمَعُ وَلَا يُبْصِرُ وَلَا يُغْنِي عَنْكَ شَيْئًا يَا أَبَتِ إِنِّي قَدْ جَاءَنِي مِنَ الْعِلْمِ مَا لَمْ يَأْتِكَ فَاتَّبِعْنِي أَهْدِكَ صِرَاطًا سَوِيًّا. Mentioned too in the Quran the story of Abraham. He was a man of truth, a prophet. He said to his father, Father, why do you worship something that can neither hear nor see nor benefit you in any way? Now what's happening here is a typical kind of scenario of where you disagree with your parents. I know today people do it much more than in earlier days, because today we're characterized more by individualism than before, when people were characterized more by tribalism. And in that kind of a scenario, not only father and parents and children, but also the whole tribe used to generally be on one belief. That's why in Medina Munawwara you had the leaders of the Aus and Khazraj. When they became Muslim, their entire tribes just followed. They just all became Muslim. So essentially what you have is, today it's different. Everybody thinks for themselves. Parents, especially first and second generation gap problems, parents have nightmares in terms of keeping their children within their so-called desired culture. No child wants to follow the culture of what the parents might consider back home, because the children consider this home and not anywhere else. So there's always this. Now, how do you deal with that kind of a situation? Look how Ibrahim a.s. is dealing with it. He is not turning up his face, for example. He's not just, he's trying actively to intelligently have a discussion with his father. He's asking him a question. He says, Father, like, Ya abati, oh my father. He's not just turning his nose up at him. He's not saying it with a frown. He's not saying it in a very ugly way, as some of us sometimes do with our parents. He says, oh my father, why do you worship something that can neither hear nor see nor benefit you in any way? It can't hear, it can't see, and it can't benefit you in any way. These are fundamental traits of any being that is supposed to be of some kind of assistance to anybody. And none of these can do that for you. He says, Father, knowledge that has not reached you has come to me. Now, imagine saying that to your father. I know something that you don't know. We all think that, especially if our parents don't speak very good English and they're immigrants or first generation, and we're brought up here speaking without an accent, or suddenly discovering how things work, and parents are sometimes in the dark about certain things. We sometimes act very condescending towards our parents. He says, I mean, how are you going to come across and trying to tell your father, I really know something that you don't know? That is such a difficult, that's such a difficult proposition. He says, Father, knowledge that has not reached you has come to me, so follow me. I will guide you to an even path. I will guide you to an even path. Do not worship the shaitan. Shaitan has rebelled against the Lord of mercy. Father, I fear that a punishment from the Lord of mercy may afflict you, and that you may become Satan's companion in hellfire. His father answered, his father's too tired, too old to change his religion. This is generally the problem. As people get older, if you understand a blackboard, in the days of the oh, you actually do have a blackboard here. So if you look at the blackboard, they generally have to keep painting over it and refreshing its blackness. Otherwise, over time, it doesn't remain very black anymore. And also, over time, marks are becoming ingrained in it. And it's much more difficult to get rid of, well, even on a whiteboard, eventually it gets more difficult to get rid of something that has been on there for too long, right? So likewise, when it comes to human beings, we become more set in our ways. To be honest, if you took a survey of human beings, it will be an absolute minority who will remain flexible enough as they age. Most eventually become tired of pursuing different things. They want to be in a comfort zone, and they don't want to change and try new things. That happens to most people. There's probably only a minority that are, mashallah, always vibrant, even at the age of 70. Yes, let's go and do that. Let's go and do that. And that's just the way human beings generally are. So his father's probably too old for this. Nobody's too old for this, but just as a person. I remember I went to one of my teachers who is quite eccentric. He's a genius, but he's very eccentric in the way he deals with things. And he says, I've written this book on Arabic grammar. I've written this book in Arabic grammar. I've given it to very selected individuals to read. I'd like to give it to you to read. I said, okay, wonderful. He says, He says in Urdu, he says, "Aap thak gaye." Like, are you tired? It's like, what do you mean I'm tired? It was morning time, right? I said, no, I'm not tired. He goes, are you tired? What he meant is, have you given up studying and researching? Like, you're just satisfied with what you have and you're not going to progress anymore. That's what he meant by saying, are you tired? And what he's underscoring there is a lot that happens to a lot of people. So it happens to a lot of people, but that cannot stop you from looking at the truth. Much of our problems in our communities, in our mosque committees, just in general, it's issues to do with inflexibility. It's issues to do with people resisting change, resisting positive change. One is negative change, but resisting positive change. People who don't want to come out of their comfort zone, who don't want to move out and make a difference because they're just too comfortable. Even though they know it's wrong, they know it's a hassle even, they still don't want to make a change. That's why he says, his father answered, Abraham, do you reject my gods? I will stone you if you do not stop this. Keep out of my way. Now this, as you'll see with this, and as you see later on, when he later on has another discussion, because in this discussion, I'll actually keep that point for later. He said, in this one, it says, finally Ibrahim a.s. realizes he's not going to get anywhere with his father. He's not going to get anywhere there, and it's harmful for him to be there in all of this. So he wants to go out and he wants to find another place to worship him, worship his Lord. So then he says to him, he says, for now, I will leave you, and the idols you all pray to, I will abandon them. But I will pray to my Lord and trust that my prayer will not be in vain. When he left his people and those they served besides God, we granted him Isaac and Jacob and made them both prophets. That obviously happened much later. But in this case, Allah just wants to kind of sum up the story. So then he says that. Now, as we carry on, this one's the kind of dramatic event. وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا إِبْرَاهِيمَ رُشْدَهُ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَكُنَّا بِهِ عَالِمِينَ إِذْ قَالَ لِأَبِيهِ وَقَوْمِهِ مَا هَذِهِ التَّمَاثِيلُ الَّتِي أَنْتُمْ لَهَا عَاكِفُونَ. He seems to have gone back to his people and he seems to be challenging them again. Because he had the other challenge about the moon and the sun with the people in Haran, because they were the worshippers of the stars. However, his own people are worshippers of idols. This is back in Babel, it seems. So anyway, when he goes there to Babylon, he says to his father and to his people, مَا هَذِهِ التَّمَاثِيلُ الَّتِي أَنْتُمْ لَهَا عَاكِفُونَ. What are these idols that you seem to be, that you are so devoted to, that you're just constantly on them, you won't give them up. You're so devoted to these idols. So this is their answer. قالوا وجدنا آباءنا لها عابدين. This is what we found our forefathers doing. قال لقد كنتم أنتم وآباؤكم في ضلال مبين. Now you can see he is much more brazen here. In the first one, he was polite to his father in the way he dealt with him. He says, I'm going to pray for you, but I'm going to leave you, and I'm going to go and worship my Lord elsewhere. But in this case, he's here for a challenge. He's here for the debate, and he's going to do something. So he says, and if you understand Arabic, قال لقد كنتم أنتم وآباؤكم في ضلال مبين, with so much emphasis that you are surely, for definite, you are in a clear, you have clearly gone astray. You are clearly misguided. Now that's a major challenge just to start with. Then he says, they say, قالوا أجئتنا بالحق أم أنت من اللاعبين. Now this tells me, this particular verse tells me that they hadn't been challenged too often. And it really got them thinking. Because they ask him, have you come to us with the truth? Something you really think is the truth, or are you just messing around? Now, what does that tell you about somebody? If they say that to you, one is that they recognize that, okay, you are messing around, or that you are deluded. Now, they are actually asking him that, do you have reason to believe that you have brought the truth? Or أنت لاعب من اللاعبين, those who are just playing around, jesting, and just joking, and just trying to make a mockery of something, because you don't really care. قال بل ربكم رب السماوات والأرض الذي فطرهن وأنا على ذلكم من الشاهدين. وَتَاللَّهِ لَأَكِيدَنَّ أَصْنَامَكُمْ بَعْدَ أَن تُوَلُّوا مُدْبِرِينَ. So now what happens is, he says, no, it's your Lord and the Lord of the heavens and the earth that created them. And I am of those who bear witness to this. So I am serious about this. I am absolutely serious about this. Look at the answer that they give first. The answer is, this is what we found our parents doing. Question, are our parents an authority? That's the question. Are our parents gods? Are they an authority? So today what you have is, you must marry your cousin sister who's in Pakistan. Why? Because that's the way our people do it. You are already given to her from when you were born. It was already written. And that's why I went into a friend of mine's house. He's a doctor, very wealthy man, everything. My wife sees in their kitchen family photos, and she sees a girl that we don't recognize as being part of the family. They've got a young son. We don't see them recognizing, we don't recognize that girl. So my wife asked, who is this then? That seems to be among all of these other family photos. He says, oh, this is so-and-so, my son's cousin sister in Pakistan, and they're going to get married. And the guy is he is about 8 or 9 years old at the time. Many of you fixed up as well like that already? Right. So now it's very difficult to get this into their minds that, look, this is incorrect. That this is not something I'd like to do. Because for them it's their child on one side who they're supposed to love, but it seems like they love their culture more. And I'm just trying to underscore what these people are going through. It seems like they love their culture so much that they're going to be willing to give up their child. Because we've had cases where a child, he's an adult now, he married somebody that his parents didn't, because he didn't marry the person they had originally fixed him up to or expected him to be fixed up to. Their family obviously put a lot of pressure on them. Their extended family put a lot of pressure on them. So now he finally moved out of the house. It's 2 years afterwards, and they're still holding the gripe. They're still holding the grudge. They won't let him come back into the house. They don't want to see him anymore. So it's become that culture, and what forefathers did is more beloved to a person, or it's stronger at least. It's stronger at least than your own children. Can you understand how strong culture is now? You can give up your children for that. Now, clearly inside, it's not that you give up and you've made a choice that you're comfortable with. You're very uncomfortable. These parents are not happy, clearly, but they want the best of both worlds. But this culture above them is so strong that is going to rule their life. And likewise, you've got that situation here. So although what we're talking about in terms of our culture is not about a kufr and shirk situation, right? It's just, it's a situation of harm for sure though. This is what they're going through. Their answer is not an answer. This is what we found our parents doing. Well, look beyond that. There's a world that exists beyond that. There's a reality beyond that. This is not a reality. That's what the issue is. That's why he then says, وَتَاللَّهِ لَأَكِيدَنَّ أَصْنَامَكُمْ بَعْدَ أَن تُوَلُّوا مُدْبِرِينَ. Now he says, by Allah, I'm going to do something with these idols. After you go, I'm going to do something. Now it's mentioned in the tafsirs whether he said that openly or whether it's most likely he said that to himself. So this is something he's planning himself. Although it does say in some narrations that this is something that some of them heard. They probably didn't take any notice. They were very comfortable in their idol worship, it seemed. Nobody had ever touched them. Everybody believed. There were no other beliefs at the time. This man who's coming, Ibrahim, this young man who's coming and challenging them, they didn't take much notice, it seems. They didn't take much notice. So then it carries on. فَجَعَلَهُمْ جُذَاذًا إِلَّا كَبِيرًا لَهُمْ لَعَلَّهُمْ إِلَيْهِ يَرْجِعُونَ. So in this one, there's another selection of verses which tells you in detail what he did. He went in, he said, don't you eat? Because he saw that when people had gone out, they had left a lot of food there for the idols. So he goes up and he says, don't you eat? So he's speaking to the idols. Now there's nobody else looking at him, but maybe he's just trying to satisfy himself and saying, don't you eat? Can you not do anything? you have nothing, there's nothing that you can do. Anyway, in this place, in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, which I'm reading from Surah Al-Anbiya, فَجَعَلَهُمْ جُذَاذًا إِلَّا كَبِيرًا لَهُمْ لَعَلَّهُمْ إِلَيْهِ يَرْجِعُونَ. He broke them into pieces. He destroyed all of them except the big one. So there was a big one there. لَعَلَّهُمْ إِلَيْهِ يَرْجِعُونَ. So that they could come back and resort to that big one. Now it's almost like it's speaking from their perspective. Because if it's their God should be able to help them. So he's saying he destroyed all of them except the large one so that they could have somebody to resort to. They can ask the big one what happened. Then قالوا فأتوا به على, then he says قالوا من فعل هذا بآلهتنا إنه لمن الظالمين. They came back. Who did this with our gods? He must be an oppressor. He must be of the oppressors. Now this tells you itself that they don't know what they're speaking about. Because when you say, I am an oppressor or somebody's an oppressor, oppressor means somebody who does something wrong to someone. How can you do wrong to a god and a deity that is supposed to be powerful in their concepts? Now this just tells you that a deity and a god is supposed to be in your mind, the all-powerful. If you've reduced something else to be your God that doesn't have the power, then there's clearly a problem with your understanding. So he's saying, who did this? Who did this with our gods? He must be of the oppressors. قالوا سمعنا فتى يذكرهم يقال له إبراهيم. So now some of them speaking and they're saying, there was a young man, fatan, a youth. There's a young man who we noticed was speaking about them. Meaning he was saying bad things about them. He's complaining about them. His name is Ibrahim. قالوا فأتوا به على أعين الناس لعلهم يشهدون. Bring him in front of people so that they can witness this event, how we deal with this man. This is exactly what Ibrahim a.s. wanted. Now in the other cluster of verses, when he comes in, anyway, قالوا أأنت فعلت هذا بآلهتنا يا إبراهيم. Now they can't prove he did it, but they're saying, did you do this to our lords, O Ibrahim? Did you do this to our lords? قال بل فعله كبيرهم هذا فاسألوهم إن كانوا ينطقون. What's his answer? His answer is no. It was this big one who did this. Why don't you ask them if they speak? Now, is that a lie? Clearly he did it. He's saying, no, it's this big one who did it. Now, there's a number of reasons that are given here. The best explanation that I've seen so far is that it was the big one who made me do it. He got me so angry that he did. So he is the one who did it, meaning he's the cause of it. Because he's the big one who got me really disgruntled by this and I broke all of them. Ask them if they speak. فَرَجَعُوا إِلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ فَقَالُوا إِنَّكُمْ أَنْتُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. They felt remorseful. They went into self-reflection. They regretted it in the sense that they were defeated. And one reason why they were defeated is, as I told you before, it doesn't seem like they thought anybody would ever do anything to these idols. So they had gone off, not left anybody to protect their idols, and come back to find this carnage there. ثُمَّ نُكِسُوا عَلَىٰ رُؤُوسِهِمْ لَقَدْ عَلِمْتَ مَا هَؤُلَاءِ يَنْطِقُونَ. So now, it's almost like you can hear the anger. They're saying, you know that they don't speak. How can you tell us to tell them, to speak to them when you know that they don't speak? So then Ibrahim a.s. finds his path and he says, أَفَتَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ مَا لَا يَنْفَعُكُمْ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَضُرُّكُمْ. Then are you worshipping besides Allah something that doesn't benefit you, nor can they harm you? Uffin lakum. He gets his axes. Uffin lakum. Uffin lakum. Woe be upon you. So bad it is. So bad it is. وَلِمَا تَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ. And for those that you worship besides Allah. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. You still don't get it? You still don't understand? Now, قالوا حرقوه وانصروا آلهتكم إن كنتم فاعلين. Now what happens when a person loses their argument, has nothing to say, or is not very bright? How do they respond? If they're decent people, they will accept and they will move along. Most people, they don't do this. There's arrogance, there's pride. What happens is they turn to aggression. When you lose your intellectual ability to discuss with somebody and have a dialogue with somebody, then it leads you to aggression. And subhanallah, unfortunately, this is what's happening with many of our brothers out there who are committing these acts. They feel helpless. They feel that they can't argue. They feel it's all lost. They've lost their hope in Allah, it seems, and they feel that the only way to bring about a change is to go and kill innocent people. This is what you call an aggression. And it's not just happening with those so-called extremists. It's also happened, and you needed to have heard Bush after 9/11. He sounded like the Pharaoh. He literally sounded like the Pharaoh. He said, he's like, you're with us or you're against us. It was almost like he's making that complete distinction. And this is what happens. When you feel that you can't intellectually argue with somebody, I see, if we look at this country, you've got about 3 million Muslims in this country. And when you look at the big cities like London, Manchester, Birmingham, in fact, Birmingham's non-Muslims aren't even supposed to be allowed in there apparently, right? You know, according to certain reporters. If you look at the big cities, maybe even Sheffield, I don't know too much about Sheffield, but big cities that you know about, they are filled with Muslims, right? We've got 3 million Muslims, but Muslims, they are everywhere. If you come down to London, we've got a population of 8 million or so, out of which 1 million is Muslim. That's more than 1 in 10 are Muslim in London. That's why wherever you go in London, you're bumping into Muslims, right? You go into Oxford Street and you see about 3 to 4 Muslims per 10, you know. That's all those guys from all those countries, like Arab countries, are coming to dump their money here for some reason. They don't like their money, put it somewhere else, so they come and dump it on Oxford Street, right? Alhamdulillah. So now what you've got here is that Muslims are coming in and they have a tradition that they so much love. Now, they love their tradition. They love their tradition so much that they wear it on themselves. They go mosque. They have certain demands at university and at work. We have to pray at certain times. We have to wash. We need a prayer place, and so on and so forth. It goes against the norm of the society that we live in. Now, that creates a challenge. It's in your face. And mashallah, in this case, the women are leading this because those that wear hijab, they are clearly and boldly putting themselves out there as Muslims, because that men can sometimes disguise themselves and can pass off as, you know, something else or the other, but not women. They can't get away with that. Right? We just don't have another parallel for that. So what you've got is you've got it in your face. Now, a lot of people, they are discomforted by the fact that this is messing up our way of life that they're used to, what we found our forefathers doing. That's what it is. Now, has anybody who's committed any of these atrocious attacks, has anybody ever said that we hate your way of life? They're always talking about Syria or whatever the case is. But what these people feel the most, the people on the street, for the politicians, it's all corporate. It's all money making. It's all about helping some corporation or the other, or the defense industry, right? And it's all about making sure your country gets enough funding from the people who have these, have these different agendas. For the normal person on the street, though, they are led to believe that these people will come and change your system. And clearly you can see that there is a challenge to that system. Now, there are certain things that non-Muslims have assimilated into very easily and enjoyably, right? But when it comes to other things, it's very difficult for them. So what they've assimilated into is the food, for example. Asian food, not necessarily Muslim food, but it's Asian food, it's Indian, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi food, right? That is top food here. In America, it's not. It's Mexican food in America. But in England, it's Indian food as such, in its varieties. That's fine. They're fine with that. You have Muslims with hijab marrying on EastEnders. So it's reached to that level, right? You have, mashallah, you have bake-offs with hijabi women. So you have all of these different things that are happening. So they're willing to accept certain things like this. I mean, you have the Prime Minister who went up and he spoke so highly and so in such a celebrating way about the halal sukuks, which is the Islamic finance, because there's a lot of money that's coming in from these wealthy Muslim countries which they want part of. So they're embracing all of that. But when it comes to all of these other things, they don't want to embrace. So it leads to racism. Racism is essentially an aggressive response to something that you cannot intellectually deal with. Why does a person become racist? Is because they don't know any better. They can't find within their own framework somewhere to include and tolerate and deal with the differences that they are seeing. Otherwise, why is it in Switzerland, or in France for that matter, or in Belgium for that matter, why is it that you've got a minority, an absolute minority, especially in Switzerland, an absolute minority of Muslims, number one, among the Muslims, an absolute minority of niqabis, women who cover their faces, and they want to bring a law for them. Like, out of everything that you could bring a law about and you could introduce a law for, you introduce it for the niqab. Why is it that? What is it that bothers you so much about a piece of cloth on the face? And they are very clear in there that if the face is covered for any other reason, it's fine. It just cannot be covered for religious reasons. So you can tell that it's a clear understanding that it's this issue that they're confronted with. It's this dilemma they're confronted with. People need to open their minds. And unfortunately, the freedom of speech that we always celebrate, it's not for everybody. It's the same kind of reaction that these people are having here. That's why the reaction that we had after 9/11 was against the Taliban. That reaction by killing so many innocent people in Afghanistan and then in Iraq, what did it create? It created Al-Qaeda, which is a bigger monster. Then you went after that and started to do more aggression. And then after that, you get another even more evil monster, which is the ISIS. Now, if that carries on and more people are killed, innocent people are killed on all sides, then what kind of a monster is going to be created next? I fear that. I fear that. This is the turmoil that we are in. This is the turmoil that we are in. Now what's happening with a lot of people out there, a lot of Muslims out there, is that they are choosing their path now. There's a lot of Muslims who are just on the edge. When they see that Muslims are going to be aggressed against, they're going to change their religion. They're going to dilute their religion if they don't change it. They're going to try to assimilate and just try to be more white than white. Right? That's not a very fair term though, but you know what I mean. They're going to try to do the best that they can to try to avoid any kind of hindrance by overcompensating for their differences. Now, what does Ibrahim alayhi salam do? And what is he then given? This is what I want to mention from here. Then he says, after all of this, قَالُوا حَرِّقُوهُ وَانْصُرُوا آلِهَتَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ فَاعِلِينَ. Burn him and assist your lords, assist your gods. If you're going to do something, assist your gods. So they are invoking and rallying everybody in the name of their gods to try to get everybody emotionally active that we need to burn him. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't tell us how they made the fire and so on, but we learned that through some hadith. It says that they then started collecting wood. So they found a large pit in an open ground. There was a large pit in the ground. They tried to find as much wood as possible, firewood from all over the place. In fact, it says that everybody was just so wound up by this that women, if they couldn't have children, for example, they sometimes take a vow that if I have children, or if this happens to me, or if that happens to me, then I'll give sadaqah or whatever. They started saying that if my job gets done, I will go and find wood to go and put into that blaze. They don't even know Ibrahim alayhi salam. Most of them don't even know Ibrahim, but they've been rallied to such a degree that everybody now wants to take part. So now they're collecting all of this firewood. Now they collect the firewood and they start the fire. When they start the fire, it is too hot for anybody to go and throw Ibrahim or push him inside, because it is so blazing and the inferno is so great that there's no way they can even get close. So there's a man among them who decides to develop a contraption. So he designs the catapult, and they say that that was the first catapult in the world. So they design this catapult, put him on there, and then they fling him inside. Now, as he's being flung inside, now how many seconds may that be? This is not a parachute he has. He's being flung inside, and there has to be enough force for him to be taken from that distance into the fire. The angel of wind comes to him. The angel of wind comes to him and says, your command, what do you want? Jibreel comes to him, right? All these angels, they come to him. What can we do for you? He says, I leave it to Allah. Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel. Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel. When I read this, and Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel is not just used here, but it's used by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in other places where others were being aggressed against, and they read it's one of the most powerful du'as that you can read. But you don't read it blindly, not knowing what it means. You read it with meaning, then you see that its benefit will come to you. Hasbunallah. Allah is sufficient for us. Wa ni'mal wakeel. And He is the best of patrons, best of caretakers, the best of those that can control things for you and your affairs. He said, Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya naru kuni bardan wa salaman ala Ibrahim. Ya naru kuni bardan wa salaman ala Ibrahim. O fire, become cool. Wa salaman, and an abode of peace for Ibrahim. Ulama have written here that if Allah did not say salaman and He just said become cold, it would have been so cold in there that would have been critical as well. Because when Allah gives a command of some sort, He said be cold and salaman. Now what's interesting is that He's flung into this. The part where He stayed there for a very long time, several days or more, because that fire was, and they kept adding more fuel to it. The part that he was in, it was completely fine. He said, he says afterwards, I've not spent any time more peaceful, more greater well-being than that. Yeah, as I mentioned, Jibreel alayhi salam comes to him and he says to him, Ya Ibrahim, alaka haja. Oh Ibrahim, do you have a need? Now imagine how fast all of this is happening. And he says, Amma ilayk fala. I have a need, but not to you. I have no need with you. And the angel of rain came about and he says, Mata umar fa ursil matar. When am I going to be commanded? I'll send a rain. The rain will extinguish this right away. Fakana amrullahi asra. But Allah's command was even faster. Allah's command was faster. Ya naru kuni bardan wa salaman ala Ibrahim. So suddenly this becomes totally a peaceful place for Ibrahim alayhi salam. There's a number of different narrations. You see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't go into extreme detail because the whole purpose is not to tell a story and not to entertain, but it's rather to take a lesson. However, people get bored without some kind of juicy detail. That's why we add the detail here, all right? And within it, inshallah, we can have our reflection as we go along. So what happens then is Ibrahim alayhi salam was almost as if he was in a green meadow enjoying himself with all that coolness. And what's amazing is that people could actually see him in there. People could actually see him inside, unscathed, totally sound and not burnt at all and not in any kind of misery. But they can't come to him and he's not going out to them. He's just enjoying it while he's sitting there. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu relates that one of the best expressions that come from Ibrahim alayhi salam is when he saw the father of Ibrahim alayhi salam. This was one of the best things that he ever said in his life. When he saw Ibrahim alayhi salam like that, he said, Ni'mar Rabb Rabbuka ya Ibrahim. What a beautiful Lord your Lord is, O Ibrahim. But there's no proof he became Muslim or not afterwards. But when he saw him in that state, something may have changed. Ibrahim alayhi salam wanted everybody to watch him because that would be a game changer for everybody. One is an argument that you provide. Another one is a scene that they all see and they see that nothing happens to him. It's Ibn Asakir relates from Ikrimah that the mother of Ibrahim alayhi salam, you see, a mother is a mother at the end of the day. What Allah has given and chipped a mother out with, the love for their children, is more than anybody else. That chip is just ajib. So she looks at her son and she calls out, Ya bunayya uridu an aji. أريد أن أجي إليك فأدعو الله أن ينجيني من حر النار حولك. My son, I want to come and see you. My son, I want to come and see you. Pray to your Lord that He give me a safe passage through this fire to you. A safe passage to you. فقال نعم. He says, absolutely. He prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and she came. Nothing of that fire touched her. She had a safe passage through it, and she came, she hugged him, embraced him, she kissed him, and then after that she returned. There's different opinions as to how long he stayed there, 40 days or 50 days. But he says that Ibrahim alayhi salam, is reported from him that these were the best of days and nights that I've ever spent. And I wish that that same experience could have been continued for me thereafter. But this is the world, and the world changes. So nothing happened. And then he moves out. He comes out of it. And then after he comes out of the fire, remember, these were his people. This was not a dialogue or an exchange with any leader. Now, the leader of the time, the ruler of the time rather, was Nimrod. Nimrod or Nimrod. There's actually a city that's called that's actually what do you call it? Nimrod, that's named after this heritage. But there's many differences of opinion as to who exactly he was and where exactly did he exist. But all I can mention is that this argument, this debate between Ibrahim alayhi salam and Nimrod took place after he came out of the fire. So he must have come across Nimrod and all of his people. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِي حَاجَّ إِبْرَاهِيمَ فِي رَبِّهِ أَنْ آتَاهُ اللَّهُ الْمُلْكَ إِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّيَ الَّذِي يُحْيِي وَيُمِيتُ قَالَ أَنَا أُحْيِي وَأُمِيتُ قال إبراهيم فإن الله يأتي بالشمس من المشرق فأت بها من المغرب فبهت الذي كفر والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. O Prophet, have you not thought about the man who disputed with Ibrahim about his Lord? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't mention the name of Nimrod in the Quran. He just says, the one who debated with Ibrahim alayhi salam. And this is a man who Allah had given the power to rule. He'd given him an extensive sovereignty over much of the world at the time. In fact, what's mentioned is that this was a king who ruled the world. He's one of the few kings that actually ruled much of the world. And when we say the world in those days, this was very close to Nuh alayhi salam's time. See, when you say Nuh alayhi salam in his time, everybody else was killed. There's a difference of opinion whether the flood was local or was it universal. Now, one of the theories here is that even if it was local, it's fine because there weren't many people that were living elsewhere. Civilization hadn't probably spread as far. Because when you look during the time of Dhul Qarnayn, he does go extensively out of the society, and then he goes extremely east and then west, and he finds like one group of people here, one group of people there, as such, a community of people. So it seems like maybe, like the extensive spillover we've had right now, and the entire world has people living around it right now. Maybe it wasn't like that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best exactly. But the point here is that what's related in history, that there's only been 4 individuals. There's only been 4 individuals who've actually ruled the entire world. 2 have been believers and 2 have been non-believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The 2 believers were Dhul Qarnayn, and the other is Sulaiman alayhi salam. Now Sulaiman alayhi salam was unparalleled. Even among the 4, he was unparalleled because he had sovereignty over the birds and animals, over the winds, and over the jinn. So he was in a whole different level completely. Then the 2 that were non-Muslim, that were non-believers, they were Nimrod and Bukhtu Nasr. That's Nebuchadnezzar and Nimrod. We know a lot more about Nebuchadnezzar because he seems to have come later. right? And he's the one who destroyed Jerusalem first. So there's a lot more information about him. But he came from Babylon as well. Now Namrud is this one that we're speaking about. Allah had given him extensive rule, but unfortunately he wasn't very intellectual. When I say he's not very intellectual, look at the way he speaks. Have you not thought about the man who disputed with Ibrahim about his Lord? Because Allah had given him power to rule. Clearly Allah is saying here that his whole debate and his whole argument is based on the fact that he was intoxicated by his wealth. Not because he was very intelligent or anything like that. Because he would never have spoken the way he did if he didn't have rule and if he had intelligence. Because look at what he says. When Ibrahim a.s. said to him, so there is this man, Ibrahim a.s. suddenly meets him, and he starts claiming lordship. He starts claiming sovereignty. He starts claiming godhood. So Ibrahim a.s. said that it is my Lord who gives life and death. So that's Ibrahim a.s.'s first argument to him. My Lord is the one who gives life and death. If you give life and death, tell us. So he tried to silence him that way. But apparently, the person, he couldn't answer what his response was. I too give life and death. But the way he expressed that was, he got somebody, he called two individuals. One was a free man on the street. He brings him in and kills him. He says, look, I've just given death. And he calls another man who was imprisoned and who was supposed to go to the gallows probably and be killed. He brings him out and he says, okay, I set you free. So he says, look, I've just done the same thing. I also bring life. I also give death. Now Ibrahim a.s. realized that this man, he's providing these specious arguments because it's not related to what Ibrahim a.s. was asking about real life and real death in terms of giving birth to somebody. So then Ibrahim a.s. said to him, Ibrahim a.s. said, God brings the sun from the east, you bring it from the west. This disbeliever was completely dumbfounded. God does not guide those who do evil. So you can clearly tell that he wasn't a very intelligent man who made this. And he can only do this because he's got the power to go and kill somebody or set somebody free. That's why he resorted to what he had available under him. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't like that. So this Namrud was actually the ruler of Babylon. And his name is Namrud ibn Kan'an ibn Kaush ibn Sam ibn Nuh. So he's also from a great grandson of Nuh alayhi salam. Of course, every human being is. And he's from Sam as well. There's other versions about this because you can never be definite at that level. Namrud, they say, ruled his kingdom for about 400 years because apparently in those days lives were much longer. Nuh alayhi salam remained in this world for more than 950 years. So you can imagine that this 400 years was not much either. But he was extremely tyrannical. He was a tyrant and he was extremely rebellious and he was very violent and he was an oppressor. When Ibrahim alayhi salam called him to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's when this thing happened. So after all of this happened, finally what happens is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent an angel who confronted Namrud and said to him, you bring your entire army. So he doesn't come as an angel, he comes in the form of a human being or something and challenges Namrud and says to him, you bring your army and I'll bring mine and we will see who wins. So Namrud gets together his entire army. He comes in all of this style, all of this valor. He comes with all of these adornments around him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just sends small mosquitoes. One mosquito gets into his nose. A single mosquito. He's the ruler of the world that has seldomly been seen like this. He gets a mosquito in his nose and it bothered him for a long period. In fact, it says that he would get so aggravated. Imagine a mosquito buzzing around in your nose and you can't do much about it. You know, in these days you have these apparatus about pulling, about suctions and so on and so forth. It stayed in his nose for a very long period and he would have to smack himself. He would get people to take shoes and smack his head just to get some relief. That's how he finally died. That's how Namrud finally died. Anyway, we'll end here in terms of the detailed coverage. That's all we could cover today. But what I see as Ibrahim alayhi salam as my conclusion is that this is a man who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen to test. He left his hometown. He's not in the comfort of his local community. He had to leave his father. He had to leave his people. After that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he had his wife Sarah. Then he had his, then there's a very interesting story. They were going through Egypt, and there was a king there who was just what do you call it? He was a, what's the word? He was given to vice. Every beautiful woman there, he would just take her for himself. Unless they were the sister of somebody. If you told him that it was your wife, he would take her. He felt that he had the right. So that's where Ibrahim alayhi salam told him that, no, that's my sister. And when he came home, he told Sarah, if he asks you, say that you are my sister. Because at that time in the entire world, there were only one couple that were Muslims. So this was a Muslim brother and sister that he referred to save himself from that. Anyway, that king still tried to get her, but every time she would pray and the king would be stopped, and then he would ask her to pray for him to be relieved from this blockage. The story is wrong. He finally gave her, he said, she's a shaitan or something, I can't touch her. And he sent her back, but he sent with her a slave girl as a gift, which was Hajar alayhi salam, or Hajar. And she gave her to Ibrahim alayhi salam. Ibrahim alayhi salam then had a child with her, while he couldn't have one with Sarah, because Sarah alayhi salam until then was barren. And then after that there were some issues, and he had to go and drop Hajar alayhi salam in Makkah Mukarramah by the foundations of the Kaaba that were there from before. And then that whole story continues there. So all of these challenges, but Ibrahim alayhi salam always won with flying colors, because his submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was good. He was willing to do whatever Allah wanted. Now, so many times in his life, he seems to have confronted a dilemma where he could have stayed in a comfort zone. He could have stayed and just changed his way, or just gone with the status quo, but he didn't do that. This is a lesson for us. These are very challenging times for us, right? And this is the message that I want to give today, that these are very challenging times for us. I already discussed to you that there's a lot of people on the fringe who pretty much given up, and they've just don't want to even assume themselves as being Muslims. Allah will give strength. There's always difficulty, because Allah has not promised ease in this world. He's left that for Jannah. But Allah will give ease for people who strengthen their faith with their faith with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There will come troubling times, but after every difficulty comes ease, because Allah says, Inna ma'al usri yusra. With every difficulty comes ease. With every difficulty comes ease. So yes, these are challenging times. These are low times right now. But inshaAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can raise this up. But unfortunately, there's going to be quite a few people that are going to lose themselves in the process. The train of Islam is moving along, and it will continue to move. But there will be people who will drop off, because the heat will get a bit intense. We ask Allah to help us and give us the iman of Ibrahim alayhi salam, because look what then Allah gives Ibrahim alayhi salam. After his time, there was no prophet that came out of his family. So all the prophets after him. Now remember, Ibrahim alayhi salam did not speak Arabic. He was from from Babylon. They spoke a different language. He moved to Jerusalem, where they spoke Hebrew, right? And his son, Ismail alayhi salam, he had him settled in Makkah. And when he was settled and they found the water, and the long story, there was the tribe of Jurhum that came from Yemen, and they started settling there. That's where they learned the Arabic from. That's where Ismail alayhi salam, from him came all of the Arabs. But from Ishaq alayhi salam came Ya'qub alayhi salam. Ya'qub alayhi salam had 12 children. And from among those 12 tribes, you had all the Bani Israel as well. Now, every single prophet after the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam is a child of his, is a grandchild of his. Every single one of the 4 main books, the Torah, the Zabur, the Evangel, and the Quran, they all come among prophets in his children. That's why he is well revered today, though most people don't know what he really stands for, but he is well revered as the patriarch of the Christians, the Jews, and the Muslims. The main thing is that Allah rewards them greatly. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ, when he went to the heavens, on the first heaven he sees Adam alayhi salam, and so on and so forth, until the 6th heaven when he meets Harun alayhi salam. And on the 7th heaven, with his back to the Kaaba of the angels, Al-Baytul Ma'mur, is Ibrahim alayhi salam. And the Prophet ﷺ, it's known that the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, after Rasulullah ﷺ, is the most superior of all prophets. Allah's rewards then are great for a person who then perseveres. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for perseverance for all of us. These are times that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we need bardan wa salaman, we need coolness and we need well-being, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to shower us with that and some of the resilience that Ibrahim alayhi salam had, and his tawakkul in Allah. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.